Good afternoon. Woohoo! 2 o'clock. It's after lunch. My name's Heather Page. I'm on the speaker committee, and I'm very excited to introduce our two next co-presenters. And because it's after lunch, this is going to be a high-energy, fast-moving event. So we're going to cut to the chase on the long bios, and I'd like to introduce our two speakers. One loves to race and fall off motorcycles and race lawnmowers. The other one loves to do cattle drives on horseback. You'll have to guess who is who, but I'd like to introduce Ian Noakes and Victoria Grady.
Thank you, Heather. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Victoria Grady, because that's Ian Noakes, in case you were wondering. I am from Washington, D.C., and I'm going to start out by telling you guys a quick little story about how this happened. So about 18 months ago, and some of you may have seen me before in 2014. Raise your hands. Awesome. 2016, did talking about attachment. And then about 18 months ago, I get a phone call from the UK, and I'm like, who is this? I don't know anybody at that number. And I answer the phone, and it's, this is Mr. Noakes. And I have been reading about attachment theory, and I've just finished ProSci training, and I think you have a hole in your theory, and, and I can fill it. And I'm like, what? You think you have a hole in my theory? Dude, who are you talking to? I do not have a hole in my theory. This is rock solid. And then I started thinking, well, what if he's right? What if there is a hole in my theory and I need to listen to what this guy's saying? So I'm going to turn it over to Ian Noakes and let him tell you what a little bit of background, and then we'll tell you about that hole he discovered.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You have a good lunch? Excellent. So thanks for that, Victoria. I'm not that big-headed, really, so I wouldn't be so presumptuous to actually say someone's wrong. It's just one of those things in terms of if you're doing a piece of work sometimes and you're trying to solve a particular problem and you start to look at something in a certain way, and that's what actually happened in this particular instance. I could actually see that there really was something in the work that Victoria had been doing, and it was completely applicable to the situation that I was actually working in at that point in time. And so I then started to see if I could put two and two together. So just being the sort of person I am, I just picked the phone up and said, hello, I'm Ian. I think I'd like to have a chat with you. And so 18 months later, after sort of a piece of work which we've done, here we are. This afternoon, very much work in progress. So what we're sort of telling you is this is where we've got to so far, and sort of get your feedback really in terms of the work which we've been doing. So make it as interactive actually as possible. And as I say, this is not a final sort of conclusion in that sense. This is where we've sort of got to. So what we're going to say today. My background personally, well, we're going to talk about three things. So one is we're going to give you an introduction to attachment. What is the actual theory behind it? Why this is actually of interest to you. And then probably more, as equally important, how you apply it. Because one of the frustrating things sometimes as change practitioners is there's a lot of theory out there. How do I practically apply it to projects that I'm in? And that's one of the things that Victoria and I have sort of been working on in terms of making this something you can physically deploy. So, from my own perspective, most of my working career has actually been in telecoms, IT, and manufacturing. So when somebody says change management, normally, and this is going to be sort of heresy in this sense, it normally means configuration change, or it means physically implementing a piece of equipment or a piece of plant. And sometimes the people aspects follow, or not at all. But by and large, someone's really sort of driven about actually installing something. And of late, if any of you have sort of started to work in the world of agile, in terms of agile development, if you've gone through the whole sort of sprint world, the whole thing is speeding up even more and more for us. You've got clients who effectively are trying to do things faster and faster and faster, which that then makes the people part of this even harder. How do I shoehorn the actual behavioral side and the people side into a project environment which is now going at 200 miles an hour? And we're standing up every morning telling us what we're going to do today. So some of you may sort of recognize this type of working environment. So this was, against this background, it was the fact that I think things are actually getting harder rather than easier as they're starting to speed up. So I started to wonder, well, do we need to look at this from a slightly different perspective? Why is it difficult for some people to change in this environment? Not everybody, but why is it difficult for some people? And so consequently, what are some of the behavioral and cultural things that are actually sitting underneath this, why they're so resistant to this? So I've now got my new shiny piece of plant actually installed in this factory, and you're not very happy about it. Okay, why is that? Why are you not particularly, as we'd say back home, chuffed about this? So this is where I started to look into the work that Victoria has been doing, and this was what was behind it. And then we also started to think, do we need a bit of a sort of what I term a la carte approach to actually doing this? So is there sort of a slightly different way to approach it? And over the last couple of days, I've heard people sort of refer to this way of looking at it. So for the Swedish speakers in the room, are there any in this afternoon? Welcome to the concept of the smorgasbord. So what this is, effectively, is for those who've ever done this in terms of, it's a menu where you actually just pick bits to actually then make these sandwiches, which the Scandinavians like. And so if you think of it in terms of this smorgasbord, what's on it? Well, it's about data inputs. We're trying to get data about behavior. What is the underlying behavior that is causing people to be resistant to actually then understand that data? And well, then we can use that data to then inform a set of behavioral-based change interventions. So it's trying to get under the skin of this. And the other key point is the fact that we can then take data from other project methodologies, other change methodologies, and we then try and sort of build up this picture. So again, we're not being prescriptive about the way in which this works. There are a set of things starting to come together, which then enables us as change professionals in this context to be able to take that data and then start to do things with it. So what we're going to sort of start to talk about is what that data starts to look like. So quick question for you then before I said we'd make this slightly interactive. I'll just try and get an understanding really amongst the audience this afternoon what change management methods has got the highest sort of type level of recognition inside your organization or the clients you work with. So are there any of you, let's say, work with LaMarche? Any hands up in terms of a method? Any of you sort of then work with change guides? Any of you work with ProSci? So, gosh. So so that is the majority in the room in this sense then are sort of au fait or have some sort of experience of using ProSci's change methodology. Interesting you put your hands up because we came to the same conclusion. And so why we actually then chose ADCAR as part of the smorgasbord. And from my own perspective, there's a number of reasons. So one is, even amongst the clients you're working with, there is that level of brand recognition. People know what it is. In the same way that project methodologies, people will specifically ask, are you qualified or are you certified in this particular method? So that there is that level of brand recognition actually already out there, and a high level number of practitioners, as sort of shown amongst yourselves. But the other key one, from me personally, is because of the project management similarities. Because most of the work I do is actually in quite a structured project environment. You're appealing to people who effectively think in a certain way, which most of you can sort of probably think about. It's sometimes quite binary. And so if you've got those similarities, you've got a structured toolkit and you've got a structured approach to doing it. So what we sort of concluded is this is quite applicable to the world which we're in if we're going to try and then understand some of the behavior that sits underneath this. And finally, it's a validated model. So we thought, right, great, let's use that as a starting point. And then if we use that as a starting point, then can we then start to get some of the data of the behavioral work that sits underneath this? This will become more apparent. Now, a lot of you will recognize this. So we've then sort of started to use the model in its in its normal sense, and so we've rolled out the awareness part. People are absolutely aware of what we're doing. Yep, great. Other than that, all the comms sort of thing. Yeah, everybody's on board, all aware of what it is. Then we find the desire scores are slightly low. Okay, and what's actually causing this? And this is, as you will know, as those of you who've actually used this as a model, this is the key one in terms of, if I can't get the desire to work, then the next steps effectively become really, really hard in terms of what level of success am I going to get from the project. So this is where we started to focus actually on this, is in terms of desire. What is it that's actually sitting underneath that lack of desire on a project? And consequently, we were using this almost as the point to then start to drill into, are there a set of behavioral things sitting underneath it? And then we can try and start to understand, what is it that's driving that behavior? So if I hand over to Victoria, she'll then start to.
So then we ask that question, okay, so if desire is one of the biggest challenges, based on the data that PROSA has been collecting, what is it about desire that is so hard to accomplish, and how can we better understand desire so that doesn't continue to be an obstacle? So we believe we know what that is. And it's related to something called attachment theory. So for those of you who were here in 2014 or 2016, it may be a quick repeat. But for those of you who are new to attachment theory, I'm going to give you a 1-minute background on where it comes from. So there's this guy named John Bowlby who started doing research on attachment theory back in the 50s and 60s. He published a trilogy of books from 69 to 83. And in each of those books, he looked at different individuals, so people. He looked at classes of people. He then moved to look at adults. He then started looking at animals, and he started looking at bugs in the last trilogy. So understanding this instinctual response that we all have that's rooted in our brains. And it goes back to some information we heard yesterday from Josh Davis talking about the neuroscience. So we're all hardwired to attach to objects. This isn't something that is a choice, right? It's an instinct. It's part of who we are as people or animals or even bugs. So we need to understand how this impacts our ability to transition through change. We attach to objects. When you are a child, you might attach to a blanket, or you might attach to a stuffed animal. As you are a teenager, you might attach to being in high school or getting a date to the prom, or might attach to a certain designer if you're really into clothes. As you move to college, you might be attached to, if you're in a sorority or fraternity, or you play a team sport, and then you move on. And now you're at work, and you're doing the same things, right? The attachment objects look different, but you're still attaching to objects just like you always have. And in the workplace, those objects might be teams, they might be processes, they might be even ideas, right? Or they could be a workspace. One of the examples that we like to throw out is the workspace example. In DC, which is where I live, we've seen this huge push towards something called hoteling. How many people know what that is? Everybody, right? And it's interesting how it works, right? Because some organizations accept it with open arms, and some organizations are like, oh, no, you don't, right? And they're, oh, no, you don't, because now I don't have anywhere to put my shoes. So what am I going to do? How am I going to get to work in my tennis shoes? And where are my nice heels so I can fool my boss? And he or she is going to think that I walked however far I had to walk from the metro to get to work in those heels or those uncomfortable shoes. Or where am I going to put the pictures of my kids, because that's how I managed to get through the day? Or where am I going to put that funny little set of beads that I got at ACMP 2017? So everybody knows that I had a really good time, but I learned a lot, right? But I did have a really good time. So where am I going to put all those things? Those are all attachment objects, right? There's a group of folks at GSA that I had a couple of students from GSA, and they went to carrying around bags, right? They had little satchels, and they put all their stuff that they needed to put in their hotel space in those bags, and they carried around. That's what they took back and forth with them to work every day, so that they could have pictures or beads or shoes or whatever it is that they wanted to have right there with them. So what happens when this attachment gets threatened, right? When we originally looked at it from the organizational perspective, and so those of you who may have know a little bit about attachment theory know that when we get threatened, I've been talking about for 6 years that it is at the organizational level, and there's these symptoms that happen, right? And this is where the hole comes in, right? So this is where Ian called me 18 months ago and said, hey, Victoria, you're looking at it at the organizational level, but what about the individuals? And I was like, I don't want to talk about that. That's not relevant. But guess what? I think it is relevant. And as I stepped back and I listened to what Ian said, and we started looking at it together over the course of the next 18 months, we started looking at something called attachment styles. Attachment styles go back to the work of another contemporary of John Bowlby named Mary Ainsworth. And I hadn't recognized the value in her contribution to the research on attachment styles in my original perspective. This is such an important lesson, not just for me, but for us as researchers and us as change practitioners, because I had to change the perspective that I had been operating inside that was, I was totally attached to this concept. I was completely in, if you will, that this was an awesome perspective that hadn't been researched and it hadn't been looked at and it wasn't published in the literature. But guess what? There was something I missed, and I needed to be open to the fact that I missed it, and the attachment style was the piece that was totally missed. So as we talked about attachment style, and this is the difference between Ian as a practitioner and me as a academic / practitioner, but I didn't get that we needed to make it easy to understand because a lot of times, I see Patrick McCresh sitting on the first row, and Patrick and I often talk about how I talk like an academic, right? But Ian came up with this idea to help get over that academic piece and think about it more from a caricature perspective. So we talked to this really cool artist, a cartoonist in the UK, and his name is Peter Rigby. And Peter came up with these characters to help us illustrate what attachment styles actually look like, right? And so to make it a little bit easier to understand. And so Ian cleverly brought 6-foot pictures of these attachment objects all the way from the UK so that we could illustrate even bigger for you guys how important it is to understand what these styles might look like. And so we're going to give you a quick definition of each one. So for fearful, when somebody mentions a change and you are a fearful attachment style, so you're instinctually predisposed, right, to be fearful of that particular change, you might be like, oh no, I can't believe I have to deal with another change. I can't believe this is going to happen to me. Or if I'm dismissive, I might say,
I'm not playing this game. This game's not for me. Carrying on as usual.
Or if I'm preoccupied, I might say, I do not have time to worry about this. This is too much change going on in my organization. I have to worry about all these other things that are going on. I do not have time to worry about another change initiative. Or
I'm secure. I'm all over this. Absolutely nothing I can't manage with this. All over it.
And the cool thing about secure is that we all think that we want to be secure, right? And that would be the natural default. The problem is secure is probably the most dangerous for you guys as the change managers and the change agents, because when you're secure, we have a tendency to project our feelings onto other people, right? And so if you're secure, you might forget that you've got fearful, preoccupied, and dismissive running around inside your organization too, right? So it's super important to be aware of what the attachment style means to you, but also to understand what it looks like in other people and how you can use those attachment styles and the information about those styles to define how you need to roll out that change initiative. How do I get my staff? How do I get my employees? How do I get my whole entire organization to move through this change? So what we've told you, given you a brief overview for attachment, I can provide you with white papers, I can provide you with journal articles, anything that you want in terms of additional information, reach out and I'll get it to you, okay, about attachment theory. Why is this of interest to you? And how you can apply this is what we're going to talk about next.
Thanks, Victoria. So back to what I was when we started this off. So Victoria's sort of given you literally a 30,000-foot explanation of attachment. But then one of the next things we started to discuss was, how do you actually implement this? How do we then turn it into something which you can use inside your own organizations and with your clients in that sense? And so if you come back to where we started from, if you then we use the ADCAR model as the starting point and then applied the attachment style index to it. So what you've got then is the ability then to start to apply these 4 styles into the back of the ADCAR model at the point where you've actually then started to say, is there a problem with desire? Because this was the problem that I was actually trying to solve at that sort of point in time, trying to understand what was actually going on with the level of resistance that I was encountering with something. So between us, what we then start to do is, right, okay, can we come up with a way of applying the attachment style to the ADCAR model to then give you a set of behavioral data? So hopefully this is now starting to make a bit more sense in terms of the smorgasbord idea, because it's this construct that we started to put together, which then gave us the data to which you can then start to work out, okay, these are the types of change interventions that we might actually want to make as a result of this. So if you sort of picture in your head, you've got these 2 things started to be fused together inside the construct of an ADCAR model. So if you just keep that at the back of your mind. Right, so just to make it a little more interactive, I'll sort of try and sort of bring this to life for you. Those of you who've got smartphones or other such devices with you, and Drew, if you all go to that URL, so kahoot.it, and then Drew, if you can flip across to let's just all hope the technology behaves itself. Okay, so there's the number to enter onto your screens. And then your names will appear in green, or now red. Could be getting past 200 at this rate. I feel like I'm in an auction. It's
Woohoo! There it is.
oh, what do I bid? What do I bid? 205, 205. Any takers? Okay, 203 it is. That's a call from the back somewhere. Right. So, excellent. Now, picture this within the context of you're all now on a project. Okay, so the first question is, I'm aware on that project that the project management skills are evolving to include change management. Okay. Got to be a bit quicker. 45 of you agree. You'll get the gist of this in a minute. Now, what you'll recognize that as, so I was a bit naughty on me there. Oh, is it? You just can't get the presenters. You really can't. So if I just take, hang on a sec, let me just move that. There's that.
Now they're sad.
Right. So, a little bit naughty. So there's 10 seconds to actually answer the question. But the thing on this is we started off within the ADCAR context. So this is a standard awareness question. So in terms of, yep, I'm aware effectively of what the project managers are up to on my particular project. So next, I understand the impact upon me and my role. Yes, indeed you do. So, desire question. You can see where we're starting to go with this in terms of the way in which you might then be able to use it. There'll be benefits for me. Yeah, a lot of you think you are. That's quite interesting. So I'm engaged in this. Remember, this is a project that you're actually on. Or highly engaged. I'll wait to see how my network reacts to these changes. Remember, that's the network within the organization that you're working. A bit more nuanced. I'll control the dynamic. Do I want those project managers doing my job? Get more nuanced. So, Victoria will now, we'll come back to you in terms of what that actually means as we progress through the actual presentation. So, Drew, if you can go back to full screen. Thanks very much. What that's just shown to you is, I mean, as I say, we'll come back to explain what that actually means, but you'll recognize the ADCAR construct, which we actually started from. And then we started to actually, as very much as just as a flavor in this sense, you can start to see where the behavioral work then starts to feed into it. So this is where you start to take desire and then starting to go down as a result of it. So Victoria will sort of come back with that. So as a bit of background, we actually did go and test this. So you haven't got a completely mad Englishman standing in front of you at the moment saying, this sounds like a good idea. We actually did go and validate it. We started off with an initial trial in the public sector in the UK. And this actually wasn't academic, it was an actual change engagement that they were going through at that point in time. Purely though, from this perspective, what we were trying to do was, does the method work? That's what we set out to do, and try and get the feedback from the team, who were highly engaged effectively. So I couldn't thank them more in this sense. And what we did is we built both a set of quantitative and qualitative aspects to the exercise. The qualitative ones are fascinating, because this is what then starts to give you a picture of of those respondents that came back with saying, I'm quite fearful about this, because you get the sorts of comments, I do feel I'm a passenger actually on this. I feel I'm a passenger as a piece of change which really I have no control over. And you start to get these sorts of comments really in terms of where then people then start to think, this has been done, not done to me, but I'm actually just a passenger on it. Whereas if you contrast that to the types of qualitative information you get back from secure respondents, it's quite different. So this is what started to give us an indication, albeit on a very small scale, and I will caveat that, but did it work? We got to the end, we actually think, yes, we think there is something in this in terms of then trying to sort of progress it as an idea. Victoria, if you then want to...
So then we decided that based on the UK study, the information was looking fantastic, and it looked like this hypothesis that that Ian put forward about utilizing attachment styles as a insert into the desire piece was working. So we went to we decided to chat with some folks in the United States, and we have talked with a team at the FAA. And Eris Scarla is actually in the room. Eris Scarla and his change team have agreed to be our second pilot. And so we are getting ready to kick off a test of the attachment styles as a function of the change initiative that's pushing forward at the Federal Aviation Administration here. And Eris, wave to everybody. He's taking a risk, and he's doing it with us, and we're excited, that Eris is willing and his team are willing to work with us on this.
So hopefully this then starts to give you some sort of idea. If we come back to where we actually started from, and I'll give you a couple of other examples of this. So what Victoria was actually then starting to talk about, what the attachment style, those objects are. And I'll give you a couple of scenarios, which I think probably quite a few of you in the room maybe sort of would recognize. Some of you sort of might work even for construction companies, where you've then actually either done office relocations or part of office moves, and in terms of then people even being attached to the parts of the office which you've then either taken apart or reconstructed in this particular type of context. The other one to think about is look at this from a mergers and acquisitions perspective. Are there anybody in the room sort of ever gets involved in the change side of M&A? Yeah, quite a few of you. So you can then sort of think in terms of particularly the company that's been acquired in this sense, people being very attached to the culture of where they came from because they really enjoyed it. They liked everything about it. And consequently, you've now been acquired by another organization, and then you're having to deal with the level of attachment in terms of what you were attached to. So this works inside small projects, and it also works inside also holds true in a much larger context. So we're getting to the point of saying, okay, understanding what those attachment objects are. As I say, they can be physical things or intangible things. And what we're trying to do then is identify, and that's why I use the word assist, in terms of whether there are a set of individual symptoms or organizational symptoms. So back to where Victoria started from, we can now start to look at this from two perspectives. And then the idea is then, as practitioners, you can then start to work to a set of change interventions, which has then informed you more in terms of what some of the behavior that you might be encountering that sits underneath it. But the idea being that practically then you can do this within an ADCAR framework. So that in a nutshell is sort of where we've got to so far in terms of the work we've done. So Victoria, do you want to...
I did what you told me not to. I pushed the black button. Okay, so I just wanted to come back to you with results, right? And about what you did so that you didn't just, oh, we just did this really interesting exercise. So as we hypothesized, and Ian and I talked about this before, given the nature of who you guys are and what you do, 68% of you are secure attachment style. That's not surprising, right? Because change is something that's part of who you are. It's part of who you believe in, what you believe in. Preoccupied, 25% of you are preoccupied, 19% of you are dismissive, and 26% of you are fearful, right? The dominant attachment style, clear dominance, 68% is secure. Remember I said that may be what we all think we're hoping for, but the challenge to you in this space is that you are secure, you understand change, you understand the potential, you understand the magnitude, but you have to make sure that your people, those that work with you, for you, and around you are on the same place that you are. So that becomes the challenge as a securely attached person. So we'd like to wind it up there, say if you have questions, here's our contact information. We'd like to ask for you to ask us any questions that you might have and see if maybe there's anybody in the audience who can poke any more holes in what we're doing.
Anybody wants to assist us.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
The other thing is, as we explained, this is very much still work in progress. So if there are any of you in the audience who either are working with clients or are organizations where you think we could actually work with you to actually then continue to validate and prove the work which we've been doing so far, we'd be really happy to actually then have a conversation with you, even on a small scale trial or a small scale pilot, because what we're then trying to do is continue to refine this theory and then to validate it and to see then if it works. So that's what I explained. This is still very much work in progress. So if there's any of you in the audience then who would like to say, think, yes, this is something I would like to actually then have a further conversation about, we'd be more than happy to have that conversation with you.
Right, exactly. And so thank you, Ian, for that. And I did forget that. And please do come and have a chat with us if you're interested, because we do want to gather data. We have public sector in the UK. We're going to have the U.S. government federal sector in the United States. And we'd love to have other countries or other sectors to be able to validate the theory in so that we can then compare and contrast what we're seeing across industries. So does anybody have any questions about the theory or input they want to give us? As we wind it up, we've still got about 8 minutes. I don't know where the mic. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay.
In one of the earlier iterations of the slides that's in the app, you had a slide about how this ties into William Bridges' transition model. Can you comment on that?
We did, and we took that out because we were afraid that in 45 minutes it would get a little bit confusing, so we decided to just focus on the ADCAR model in this, but I would be happy to share with you kind of how we think you can utilize it. And what that does, where that is in the what do you do about this. So let's say you don't use ADCAR, right? Or you want to use the smorgasbord. You want to use a bunch of different models or styles, and you want to put this together. Well, it's not just ADCAR. It's not just LaMarche, it's not just Cotter, it's not just Change Guys, it's not any one of these that fits, because desire is a critical element in every single change initiative out there. So I'm happy to speak with you, and we can share with you where we see that fitting as well, because Bridges has a very interesting perspective that integrates the psychology behind why we do things, and we think that's at the heart of activating that desire piece that we haven't been able to get at so far.
Hi, I have a question in regards to secure versus dismissive. What would you characterize somebody saying, this change is not a big deal, it's going to be fine, but in the back of your mind you kind of know it is a big deal? Is that more dismissive, or do you consider them secure?
Mm-hmm. I think they're definitely more, I think it's interesting that you asked that question. I think they're more dismissive, and I think that that's why, and something that allows you to not just make your own decisions, to allow them to answer a few questions. The assessment's 25 questions plus 13 questions on awareness and desire. So we took the questions right off of the dashboard, the ProSide dashboard, to understand where you are with awareness and desire, because that's important if you're doing this in the context of ADCAR, right? But otherwise, it's 25 questions. It's averaging 6 to 7 minutes to take. It's worth those 6 or 7 minutes to complete it so that you don't have that error of projection, right? Because you may think that X person or Sally over here is dismissive, and somebody else might think that Joe over here is secure, but they may actually be swapped because you need to, and that's why the assessment helps you try to alleviate that danger of projection. Does that make sense?
Very good, and I'm excited to hear more.
Okay.
Yeah, it surprises me that the attachment styles can be distilled down to just 4. This being a work in progress, do you anticipate that more attachment styles may emerge in your research?
I think they're derivations, but I'm going to hold true, just like I did with the symptoms of attachment behavior, to John Bowlby's work. I think we have to hold true to Mary Ainsworth's, extensive body of research on attachment styles. She spent like 15 years. 15 years, I'm hoping that I'm going to be, looking at retirement 5 years down the road. So I don't want to spend 15 years and still be working on what the styles are. So I'm going to go back to maybe 20. My husband tells me quit saying that it's 20. I don't I'm very attached to that, yeah. Because I want to go ride horses in case anybody, yeah, I'm the horseback rider. So, I think we'll probably stick with those 4, but acknowledge the derivations, as Mary Ainsworth did, as to, kind of where you stretch on either side of them. That's a really good question.
My question is similar. So since change is variable by frequency, size, locality, other variables, how does that affect people's movements within and between these different attachment styles?
Does change.
And do you have any suggestions for us on how we can move people along the scale?
So I think that's a really good question. I'll answer part and let Ian answer part 2 from the practical perspective. But I definitely think, here's the thing about attachment styles, it's different than personality. While I think there's a correlative aspect, and I think we can look at things as we move forward, like Myers-Briggs or the DISC or whatever, we can look and see how it correlates with attachment style. But I think attachment style is going to change, right? Depending on, so I don't know, how many of you guys how many of you guys will admit, first raise your hand, that you have an aspect of change that you don't like? Okay, good. So the rest of you are lying, but whatever. Because there is an aspect of change that gets it all. So like personal change for some people, totally squared away with it. I'll move, I'll get married, I'll get divorced, I'll do whatever. I'm good with that. And then some people are the same way with work. I don't care if how my job changes, change my technology, change my space, whatever. But we all have push buttons. So I think our styles, depending on where we are in life, depending on where we are in the organization, and depending on how the change directly impacts us, our attachment styles may shift a little bit. So I think it's going to be important to understand, again, it goes back to awareness. I'm telling you something that most of you didn't know before you walked in here, right, unless you looked at our slides. And that is that we have these styles that you need to pay attention to, and they're a factor in getting your employees through the desire piece. Do you think, and to answer the second part of the question.
This is one of the things that we'd like to actually prove. So, I think the hypothesis is that effectively the state can change as a result of effectively of what actually happens within, just say for argument's sake, your work environment. You might successfully then be able to sort of start to alter the way the actual style is. So by engaging properly, do people then who are fearful of something, then does that you've taken the space away for them to be fearful about. But I think this is one of the things that we then would want to prove actually as we mature the model and mature the work.
So does that have maybe one more question and then we'll wind it up?
I have a question. Last year I attended the attachment theory and I loved it, and I've been talking about it ever since. Mm-hmm. And now I'm confused. So last year what I took away was that people do become attached to things. And if I can figure out what they're attached to, I can help them bring it forward into the new future, and they'll feel secure in the future. And now I'm seeing that maybe what they're attached to is a barrier. And so I'm trying to understand, once I do see somebody's style, what do I do with it?
And so I think that's a really important question. And so what we looked at last year was very much at the organizational level, right? And so, and if you can define something called a transitional object, that's the goal, right? It's the same thing with the attachment styles. We're just looking at it from a different perspective. It's not a barrier. It's just looking at it from the individual, right? It's just like looking at personality styles and how personality styles impact the culture at your workplace. Because they do, right? Because individuals, an organization is the sum of its parts, right? And so it's just taking, it's consistent with the symptom research that we have done previously. It's just looking at it from a different perspective. So on one, you look at it from the organizational level, like how do I move this organization? And the other is more at the individual level. The attachment styles are at the individual level. How do I get beneath the surface of the individuals and really understand what it is that's causing Susie, who is did any of you guys go to that network, the networking, gosh, what was it called? The social network, I think it was, do you remember which one I'm talking about yesterday? It was amazing. The network analysis, I'm sorry, it left my head. Post 40, that's what I'm blaming. So the network analysis, so you look and you see who should be the person that is the change agent, right? You look, and that person isn't doing what you thought they would do. They're a leader, they're somebody that people look up to, or at least that's your perception. Then you do the network analysis and you see, wow, that person really isn't connected to that many people. That person really isn't the influencer that I thought they were, right? And so then you use this to kind of help you dig deeper to understand, okay, so now that I've got this leader that's a role model that people are watching push back on change, let me understand more about their attachment style and how we might be able to spin it forward to use them as a positive and not a negative. Does that make sense? So it's just taking it, thank you for saying that you were there, and thanks for coming twice. That's awesome. But I think that we're looking at it from two different perspectives.
I think we're
done. We're out of time. Thank you very much. Here's our contact
Thank you very
information.
much. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Card or whatever, I'll send you white papers, I'll send you journal articles, whatever you want to learn more about this.